Committee, it's July 7th, 2022. We're in the Aldermatic Chamber and on Zoom. The meeting link can be found on the agenda. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. If you're participating via Zoom, please state your presence, reason for not attending the meeting in person, or whether there's anyone in the room with you during this meeting, which is required under the right to know law. The clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman at Large Laurie Wilshire.
I'm here.
Alderman John Sullivan stepped out, but is he still in attendance?
I think so.
Okay,
His stuff is still here.
we'll hold him off. I'll record if he comes back into the chamber. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly.
I'm here.
Okay. Alderman Ernest Jetty.
Here.
Alderman at Large Michael O'Brien is present. And our chairman, Alderman Richard A. Dowd.
Present.
Also in attendance are Alderman Clay and Alderman Timmons. And also in attendance are John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector for the City of Nashua, and Principal Keith Richards of the Nashua High School South. And Mr. Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you. For a second, I thought you were on the committee. That's fine.
You have the bright lights shining on each side here.
Okay. All right, we have a quorum. Mr. Donovan, by the way, is on vacation. That's why our illustrious principal from Nashua High School South, Mr. Keith Richards, is going to be with us this evening. And when we get to that point, I will call you up. Public comment, is there anyone that wishes to speak on anything on the agenda? Seeing no one, move on. Communications?
There are none.
Okay. Unfinished business?
There is none.
New business resolutions?
Before us this evening is R-22-040, relative to the transfer of $160,000 from Department 162, Street Lighting, account 54100, electricity, to the Department 159, Hydrants, Fire Protection, the account 54835, hydrant fees. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion to recommend final passage.
The motion is to recommend final passage to the full board. Mr. Griffin, did you want to shine any light on this?
Good one. Good. You're not all wet.
I'm being punny today.
All right. Mr. Griffin.
I got that when I came up, shining light. But John Griffin, CFO, Treasurer, Tax Collector, thank you for entertaining this particular resolution. This is a resolution that we've been keeping our eye on, Comptroller Evans and I. Just like the mayor said, things were kind of slowed down during the pandemic months. Penachuk was awarded certain rate relief on their capital projects, and they're able to, through their utility presence, add to the bill duly noticed to us. So they're recouping monies that they've already spent, and now we have to pay that amount. We're a tariff, the hydrants are a tariffed rate structure. You folks are all, mostly all new, and there was a notion back in 2011 and 12 when we acquired Penachuk that we would not tax them and we wouldn't pay anything for water. That couldn't have been the furthest from the truth. We are obligated to pay the tariff rates as promulgated by the New Hampshire Public Utility Commission. So in this particular case, instead of using some other funding source, Ms. Evans and I took a look at the street lighting, and we expect savings in the street lighting of about $175,000. So we can use $160 to pay for this particular cost that we didn't really plan, but we'll plan more attentively next year. As you know, they go through rate processes when they need funds, but any utility company that is capital intensive, they need immediate rate relief that's justifiable to the staff at the PUC and approvable. So this is something that I definitely recommend we do, so we can pay that final bill in fiscal '22, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Just make a side note, not in FY '23, because we convinced Penachuk no, but in FY '24, there'll be at least 4 more hydrants that the city will have to pick up. That's at the landfill and at the new school. Okay, any questions on this, Alderman Jettie?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I understood the part about, we have savings from the street lighting budget. But tell me again, why do we owe money to Penachuk for hydrants? Why is that?
Well, the budget for hydrants for fiscal '22 was $3.4 million. We have several hydrants in the city, and I know Vice Clerk O'Brien knows probably where everyone is,
Yeah.
because you've shoveled everyone, right? But
Oh,
in any
I know
event-
everyone by
but
name.
we're tariffed, we have hydrants, and the Penachuk is responsible for supplying those hydrants with the water. And there's a attestation schedule that's supplied to Penachuk, tied out with the fire department that says, yeah, we added this, we subtract that. And there's a sophisticated calculation, it's a calculation, there's like a demand charge per hydrant, and then there's this inch-foot calculation that I'm not sure what that means, but we're billed, should be billed about $3.4 million, but they have rate increases that they're allowed to charge us from time to time, and that's what happened this year. But I want to make sure you answered your question, so if you have another one, I'd be happy to try to
All said,
explain.
Alderman Jettie, or follow on?
Follow up, please?
Okay.
So are you saying that there was a rate increase? And, so whatever we paid them was according to an old schedule, and since then there's been a rate increase and we have to make up the difference? Is that why?
That, essentially, that's the case, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman O'Brien?
Yeah, Mr. Griffin, clarify and correct me if I do have it wrong, but I was led to believe in my time in service, but to Alderman Jettie, these fire trucks are 2,000 gallons per minute, 1,500 to 2,000 gallons per minute. We don't really get charged at a fire. They pump a copious amount of water on the fire, such as a major blaze or something like that. We do not receive the water bill from that. So the way the Penachuk does is we just pay this particular fee. And I'm not saying we have unlimited, but as far as firefighting, it seems that we do. We're able to control all fires using municipal hydrants like that. It seems to be the more economic way of handling it.
All said, Alderman Jettie?
Yes, thank you.
Alderman Debo?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question and maybe a follow-up depending on how you answer, Mr. Griffin answers his question. So through you, I'd like to ask Mr. Griffin, the $160,000 on the savings on the streetlights, how did we get to that savings, I guess?
Good question, Mr. Chairman. Several years ago, we had street lighting bills in the $800,000 range, and Mayor Donchis and the Board of Aldermen at the time felt that we should invest in LED lights. So if you remember back, it might be 5 or 6 years from now, we purchased the LED lights and put them throughout the community. We learned a lot. We learned a lot about the brightness of the lights and all of that. But at the end of the day, we got better tariff rates from the electric company. And for consistency purposes, we always budgeted about $500,000 in street lighting in case something happened. And so we've enjoyed surpluses, appropriations not spent annually for the last several years. And this is a case that we felt that we could take care of this bill with just a transfer of the street lighting. What it means is we're not gonna have as much surplus in appropriations not spent on street lighting. But it's a good transfer, and that's the reason. We are enjoying much more favorable rates on LED lights throughout the city.
And follow up?
Follow-up?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is savings we've already had, so it's not taking into account any rate changes for electricity going forward since in August. And I don't know if we get a deal on our electricity, or do we have to pay that rate it's gonna be doubled come August. And so I don't know if the city gets a deal and that doesn't impact us, or if it will start impacting us for next year. So maybe, our rate, our prices will, or our payments will go up, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, if I
Yes,
may, that's a great question. Just like in the Penachuk situation, the hydrants are uniquely tariffed.
Okay.
In the electric side of the house, it's, once again, street lighting is uniquely tariffed. So a general water increase or a general electricity increase on either the full rate that will include the electricity and the distribution, or just a distribution rate, it wouldn't be impacted as much.
Okay.
They do, I know Penachuk, because I've spoken to them, when they go in for a general rate increase, the rates that they could charge hydrants are unaffordable, really. But, so the PUC has concepts of rate shock and all of this stuff that they can use that we can't. We can't use taxpayer shock. It's just not allowed. You have to bill whatever the assessment tells you times the tax rate. But we would expect, we don't have any notification that the 175,000 wouldn't materialize next year. But it's always good to have things that you can count on for surplus in appropriations that aren't gonna harm any division or department. So hopefully that.
Yeah, it
It's just-
does. Hopefully, I won't tell you I work for Eversource. So.
Well, they're a great company, but
At some point, we have a meeting later with our energy specialist in sustainability now, Ms. Brown. The city and the school department separately are in 5-year agreements on rates, so we're not gonna be affected for a while.
Good. It's going up.
All right, any other questions, Alderman Clee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a couple, some for the lighting and some for the water. And I think Alderman O'Brien may have answered this. My question was, we were talking about the hydrant usage that Alderman Jettie had brought up and so on. I know there's no meters on those hydrants, so we don't know exactly how much we're using, but I do know that water is also used in the paving of our roads. They tie up to the hydrants and they cool the streets down and so on. And I know Penachuk also uses them to do some flushing as well. So that does not come in, or does it come into our usage? Would they be building that into it, or they would just kind of guesstimate it based on what they assume the fire usage will be?
Actually, I can answer that.
Oh, sure,
'cause
thank you.
We had a meeting with the Penachuk. In previous years, we were not charged, because they just used the hydrants, especially at the landfill. Alderman O'Brien can testify. And when we had to put the new hydrants in, and we had a meeting with the Penachuk, they said, you should have meters on those hydrants if you're using the water like that. And now they have the meters on the hydrants.
Oh, so they do have.
So, but I also convinced them, if you will, not to charge us for 23 and get a usage history before they charge us in 24. So we're not getting charged in 23.
May I ask you a follow-up?
Sure.
So when they're doing their flushing, they will bypass that meter?
Nope.
When they're flushing the hydrants?
Flushing the hydrant, I'm
Hydrants.
sorry. I misunderstood.
Yeah, I'm sorry, not the
Flushing
street,
hydrants,
yeah.
no, we
They
don't
will
get charged for
by-
that. We
okay,
don't-
they will
we-
bypass
yeah,
that.
Yeah, they won't charge us for that.
Thank you. And may I follow-up questions on the lighting?
But like washing the trucks and stuff, they will get charged. Yes.
And we also get charged when the contractors use it to cool off the streets during paving? they do tie up to the hydrants. I can
Yeah,
tell you
how
on
that
Maywood
gets
Drive.
charged, I'm sure it will get charged, because it's all regulated by PUC, and the
Okay.
Pennachuck has no control over, they have to do that.
Okay, thank you. And I have a couple questions on lighting, if that's okay?
All right?
Okay. The first question that I have on the lighting is that I know the poles themselves belong to Eversource or whoever the utility company is. Do we pay for the bulbs to be replaced? The city did, is that correct?
Yes, we have to have on stock the lights to replace defective lights. But because we don't have a we don't have a certified lineman to go up there and put the light back in, we rendezvous with Eversource. And
Just,
fortunately, we don't have many that go out.
I'm gonna talk about one.
Yes,
If I
follow up.
may, yes. The reason that I brought that up is there was a light on Manchester Concord Street, right about the Y, in front of the front door agency that was strobing, severely strobing. When I called about that to our Public Works, I had to give them the pole number, and they got a hold of Eversource, and the only thing Eversource did was pull the head of that light. They did not change the bulb, so the wires are hanging and everything, and that's been that way for months. Is that Eversource, is that the city? Just so I get clarification, I just want to know who owns what part of that as part of this bill that we're paying. Sorry.
This particular bill is predominantly the rate per light.
Okay.
You're talking about the replacement of something, whether to get it to work.
Right.
That would be an Eversource question, but I think you need to, whoever at the DPW manages this would need to coordinate.
I will chase after them. I just didn't know if this is all part of that bill and so on. And if I just may, just look at my notes real quick.
As long as we're sticking to the question.
Yes, we are. And I think you've answered all my questions, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, so the motion on the floor is to recommend final passage of R-22-040. Any additional questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also before us this evening is R-22-041, relative to supplemental appropriation of $500,000 of fiscal year 2022 assigned fund balance into Fund 7025, City Retirement Trust Fund. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make the motion to recommend final passage.
The motion is to recommend to the full board final passage of R-22-041. Questions were asked during the public hearing. Are there any additional questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Also before us this evening is R-22-043, approving the cost items of a collective bargaining agreement between the National Board of Education and the National Association of School Principals from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2026. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make the motion to recommend final passage.
All right, thank you. Principal Richards?
Yes. Thank you for having me here tonight. Keith Richard, Principal, National High School South, but also the Vice President of our National Association of School Principals. And thank you for having this on your agenda tonight. We bring forward a 4-year contract, as said in the motion. Essentially, the two big items, cost would be it's about an average of a 3.6 increase over the course of the 4 years, and also the adoption of the new high deductible health plan for the principals. And besides those two big items, a lot of it is just some cleanup of language for clarification that has often come up when there's questions, and just trying to make sure that the language is cleared for our central office folks and also our principals and assistant principals we work with. One thing we did work hard on with that 3.6% increase is to try and elevate at least one group, our elementary assistant principals. The teacher's contract and the starting salary for the elementary principals was getting very close and in some cases overlapping. So we were trying to build a little bit of room between those positions to have some incentives for people that would want to maybe move from the ranks of a teacher into an administrative position of elementary. Besides that, it's pretty clear cut.
So, over the years, from my experience, and I'm sure Alderwoman Timmons, the principals have been shortchanged a little bit. And that's why the teachers were catching up to the vice principal's salary. So I'm sure that this is trying to make that gap worth having someone leave the teaching career and become an assistant principal, because if you're gonna get a promotion and get less money, doesn't make a lot of sense. Any questions for Mr. Richards? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed in the contract that this covers 41 employees. Are all of those, do you have any open heads? Do you have, are you fully staffed at, in the city?
Yeah, we're fully staffed. I mean, I can't think of anyone who's currently left. There might be an opening here or there. I know we were just in the process of hiring a new assistant principal at Elm Street, for example. But like this past school year, all positions were filled.
Okay, thank you.
It's very difficult to run a school without somebody at the top. I'm sure Keith can-
I concur.
Any other questions, Mr. Richards? All right, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Any other questions at all? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We'll let you go home now.
Mr. Chairman, also before this evening is R-22-044, relative to the supplemental appropriation of $1,500,000 of fiscal year 2022, assigned fund balance into Department 126, Financial Services, account 68500, abatements. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make the motion to recommend final passage.
All right, the motion is to recommend to the full board final passage of R 22-044. Are there any additional questions that weren't asked in the public hearing? Alderman Sullivan?
I had one, Mr. Chairman. Apologies, I had to step out for a moment. To Mr. Griffin, the question that I had was, when you see the abatements here, line 6, 7.7 million, is there a place on the city website where we can go and find out who got abatements and for how much? Is that trackable?
Mr. Chairman, the answer to that question is yes. What will happen is, that's gonna have a big abatement for Dartmouth Hitchcock, like about $1.8 million, and 1.5 of that is gonna be applied to this 1.5 million transfer to basically maintain some semblance of integrity for the overlay account. But we have every abatement that was approved by the Board of Assessors that's gone into adding up to this number. And we can certainly distribute a copy to the board.
Fantastic.
A follow-up question?
Thank you. The mayor mentioned that two of the reasons for this transfer, two of the reasons were because of COVID. Maybe an unrelated question, but I was just curious. I don't know how much is left in the balance, but is this something that the ARPA funds could be used towards? Because that is COVID related?
The ARPA, Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Yes, go ahead,
the ARPA, the reason why we haven't like jumped in to spend all the ARPA funds is because the rules of engagement change frequently from the US Treasury, and there's a million consultants out there trying to determine what can be spent, what you can spend the money on. But they clearly didn't want the money put into a pension plan. That shows that some of our senators are in states that don't have pension plans. They didn't want the money to just go right against the tax rate. There'll be other good ways of using those funds, and you'll hear about them at the Human Affairs. Mr. Cummings will be presenting. But in this particular case, we didn't really try to apply any of it we didn't think of using it in the overlay. The overlay, the reason for this kind of accounting gymnastics and working with Attorney Bolton and the mayor is you can't put money into overlay outside the tax rate setting process. So even though my predecessors had noted that 1.5 million as a contingency in a reserve account, we have to appropriate it. So really the gymnastics are to just bring it into an accounting department number and reduce the receivable to Dartmouth Hitchcock by that amount. That's kind of how it's gonna work. But there wasn't any, in the tax rate setting, we couldn't, in the year, just add to it. Strange. But it might be because the Department of Revenue Administration wants to really take control and charge of that tax rate setting. We recommend, the mayor indicated, we recommend an amount every year, but we carry over amounts because we know we have these pending adjudication procedures that might cost us money. You wouldn't want to drain the fund every year, and then you got to start over the next year. So it's definitely necessary, especially in times of inflation of residential homes and commercial homes, commercial properties not keeping pace with an inflationary pace with the residential. So that's why we wanted to present some of that information at the public hearing on the budget.
May I?
Follow up?
Looking into the future, seeing as some of this was driven mostly through commercial, do you see the flip happening going forward with the new assessments going on in the city for residential? Do you see in your crystal ball that perhaps in fiscal year '23 that we're going to be faced with a lot of assessment abatements because of the new assessments on residential property?
So a couple of things on that. When we finalize the overlay analysis as of June 30th, you're gonna see that there's a fair amount of residential folks that got abatements. And even though property values are increasing, everybody, like, try to keep reminding it, no one's average, everybody's unique. But what's happening now, as the mayor indicated, a lot of the commercial properties or owners, they're filing abatement. They filed them back in 18, 19, 20. They haven't been settled yet. What I'm thinking is on the residential side, when Vision Government Solutions sends out the notices to the residents, and the residents have a chance to read and digest, and more importantly, have the ability to come in for an informal hearing, they will learn why their assessment is what it is. They may disagree, but that's an opportunity for the taxpayer to come in and have a discussion, and maybe there's information that comes to light. That's supposed to ward off abatements coming forward. So I'm thinking that the residential market, if they had the chance for the informal hearing, they hear how their property was valued relative to others, they might know that an abatement might not be necessary or appropriate. They don't want to file for an abatement if they're satisfied with the calculation. The commercial side, there may be more, because they might think that their property or their rents or whatever they pay is not accurate. But I'm hopeful that the resident, as painful as it's going to be, I'm hoping that they understand their market value and how their assessment was calculated. That's kind of my crystal, but I'm not an assessing expert, but that's kind of the practicality of it, I think. Hopefully we do a nice job with the informal hearings, the notices, and that they're not gonna be, stomping up and down how great it is, but they'll know why the assessment was what it was.
Thank you. Thanks.
What's that? Yeah, I noticed there was an article in the paper today that the federal government's asking Florida for the money back because they misspent it. Alderman Jettie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Director Griffin, Treasurer, CFO, Tax Collector, man of many titles.
Right.
So, you know, I have this simple idea that in an ideal world, you know, we would assess property at fair market value, and that, you know, that we would do a good job making our assessments, and that they would be fair, and they would be able to, you know, withstand any, you know, request for abatements, you know, you know, locally or through a court or through the, you know, the tax and land appeals. You know, to be $8 million off the mark, now I understand part of that was the pilot thing that the mayor talked about, but to be off the mark by $8 million, you know, makes me think we're not doing a very good job of assessing the properties. We're treating, you know, these are just the people who filed for abatements, and I'm thinking about, you know, the rest of us who just accept, you know, what the assessing department tells us our property is worth and what our taxes are, and we just pay it. So, you know, why is my simple analysis wrong, or is it wrong? You know, why are we so far off the mark of what the assessment should be?
Mr. Griffin?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the 7.7 minus the 3.8, that's really what you're gonna find when we send out the calculations. I always wondered, is assessing of a property an art or a science? And I think it's a combination of both. We're brought up as humans to make sure we sell at the highest rate and be assessed at the lowest rate. That's kind of our objectives. We haven't had a full measure and list since 1991, so now we're able to literally, if they let us come into the homes and businesses to inspect, that helps. But I think I'm gonna leave it there because we've got some very smart, this Vision Government Solutions they presented today. I didn't get a chance to watch it, but I think on commercial property, but they're gonna be able to explain kind of what has happened in the market, the different housing stock they looked at. They're gonna be able to do a nice job. And then, as I mentioned, Alderman Sullivan, they'll be able to back it up in their, you know, they've been contracted by the city to represent their professional skills in assessing homes. It's probably the nature of the beast too, just, I mean, I was brought on in 2010, we were really coming out of a recession. And my first reevaluation, statistical, with former Chief Assessor Angelo Marino, was a significant reduction in value, if you remember those times. And then just after he retired, the market really kicked in 16, 17, 18. So the off the mark stuff, I'm not sure that's an accurate statement. People move in, they have the old assessment, they add things, they subtract things, they come in, and that's why we reval every 5 years, because things change and the market changes. So, but that's a great question. It's simple, but it isn't. And I think, yeah, I'll leave that to the experts to kind of further describe that.
All set, Alderman Jay?
Yes, thank you.
Alderman Clee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I don't think anybody comes in for abatement if they think that they've been undervalued.
That's true.
Only those that think that. But my question to you is this, the 3.8, et cetera, that the abatements that we have to pay and then we take from the overlay, that includes any kind of interest that we'd have to pay on that money, correct? And in this case, we've got delays from 2018, 2019, et cetera. So I'm sure that there's some hefty interest in that, or did they kind of push those aside because of COVID? Probably not, right?
I can answer a couple of that. I mean, during COVID, the state actually shut down. I think there was some moratoriums on things, but What's interesting is, I always thought an abatement means a check, but once I dug into the numbers, a lot of the people don't even pay to begin with. They don't pay the bill. So for those folks that don't pay the bill and then get an abatement, they might pay the new bill, but there'll be no interest given back to them. It's only the, I mean, we've all been taught to, I think we have, pay the bill, kind of like your phone bill, other bills, pay it first and we'll deal with it later. People don't pay us. As the mayor said, one of those large hospitals didn't pay us anything. So we got a check from one of them, $871,000, that's great. The other one paid us, we owe the money back. So, and then so that's the two big ones. And then you're gonna see others. You're gonna see, in the analysis, you'll see interest paid. But it's certainly not the total times the 6% interest that we pay.
Well said, Alderman Cleve.
Thank you, yeah, you answered my question.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Motion is for recommend final passage to the full board. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. New business ordinances,
There are none?
table in committee, none.
None.
General discussion. Seeing no one,
Chair?
yes, Alderman Jenny?
Yeah, I would like to, say that, my understanding has always been that, public hearing is for the public, and that, you always ask aldermen if they have clarifying questions. And I'm not sure exactly, what constitutes a clarifying question and what constitutes a question about, other parts of the thing. I've always, reserved my questions until the, until the Budget Review Committee, is dealing with it, and not, tonight there was no one from the public, so we weren't taking any of the public's time, but in other situations, I'm sure you recall when there's been, a room full of public, and the aldermen, have been reprimanded for, making the public wait for their opportunity to ask questions. So I kind of took that to heart, and I've reserved my questions until the meeting. But, like tonight, the mayor's gone, and I didn't mean to put, the Director Griffin on the spot with some of my questions, but, I think some of those questions could have been better answered by the mayor and Attorney Bolton, but they've left. So, can you give us some guidelines? Are we supposed to ask our questions at the public hearing?
The thought process is twofold. One, when the titles to these are written, they're not always very clear. And the thought process is if the aldermen have questions as to what they mean and what they represent, then if we get them answered for the aldermen, the public may not have to ask that question because they will have heard it. If they have additional questions, fine, but, or at least it may clarify their questions on how to ask it. So the idea is to, make sure the aldermen understand the resolution that we're talking about and the implications. If we wait till the budget meeting, then as you say, some of the people that have presented the things are gone. I suppose we could mandate they stay here, but also, then there are things that come up in the questions from the aldermen that perhaps the public wanted to ask. So it's always, in my opinion, been to clarify, especially since when we have the public hearing, we have the full board here. You notice that other than the budget committee, everybody left. So it's to make sure that we have the input from all of the aldermen and all of the questions to clarify so that the public will have more information on what's being in the resolution. Does that make sense?
Well, I don't know if I'm interpreting you correctly, but what I'm taking away from that is, you know, I ought to ask my questions at the public hearing. And,
If you have clarifying questions on what the resolution entails, yes. If you're concerned about the resolution itself being valid or not, that's different, and that should probably come in the budget committee meeting. But if you don't understand what the resolution means and what it's trying to do, you should ask the question in the public hearing.
okay, so if I understand what the resolution means, but I have questions about whether or not we should pass it,
Then you ask it in budget.
okay. And then if the people who would have the answers to that have left, how do we get our questions answered?
If you have questions that you feel you need them to answer, we'll make them sure they stay. But if there weren't a lot of questions during the public hearing and nobody asked them to stay, you know, they're here all day, so
Yeah,
they may have other commitments as well.
I understand it's an imposition. You know, I know our city employees, you know, put in a full day, work very hard, and they're anxious to go home, but, you know,
Yes.
I was just seeking your guidance on.
Yeah. Like, for instance, Keith Richards called me and says, Dan Donovan's on vacation and couldn't come. He asked me whether we thought we ought to have somebody here to explain the contract. I said, yes. That's why he showed up. So I felt people might have questions, so. But as far as the city employees, if we want them to stay, if you feel you're gonna be asking a question that wasn't resolved or asked in the public hearing, we can make them stay. I'm not sure about the mayor, but.
Thank
I
you.
know he had another commitment, so Alderman Sullivan?
Thank you very much. I don't know if we're gonna do remarks by Alderman. I had to step out for a phone call, so I apologize to the board for missing part of the meeting. Reason being, my son is at cadet basic training, and we found out this morning that he had a 2-hour window to make a 5-minute phone call. Otherwise, I wouldn't have heard from him for 6 weeks, so I took the opportunity to say hi to him. So my apologies to the board for
Fully
missing that
understand.
section. What's that?
I said, I fully understand, and I
Thank
know
you.
about those rules at the academy.
Yes, quite strict, yes, thank you.
All right, well, we can have remarks, so
Okay.
I'm just gonna.
That
get
works.
rid of the public comment. There's nobody here and there's nobody online, so I don't believe anybody in public comment. So remarks by Alderman. Now Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, you know, since it just happened, I just wanted to wish Alderman Kathy the best. You know, we didn't always vote the same way, but he was a good neighbor, and, you know, we talked a lot about movies and other things. So we will miss him here, and I just wish him the best and his family the best. Thank you.
Anyone else? Alderman Clooney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be repeating this at the Board of Aldermen meeting also, but Ward 3 is having a ward meeting, and we will be having the Nashua PD representative there. There'll be a representative from the FBI, actually. We are also going to have Public Works there to talk about street pavings and so on. That's going on through the city, and the mayor will be there as well. In September, I hope to have a second one, which will have community development and public health with the Mr. Mack from the Welfare Department. I've asked Doria Brown also to come to the meeting, but I haven't heard yet. I know she does have a life, and this is an after-hours party, so to speak. So I completely understand if she has actually something to do instead of coming to my meeting. But it's going to be at the Hunt Memorial Building, 7 p.m. on the 13th. Thank you.
Anyone else? Just a couple of quick things. July 11th, we'll be beginning the blasting at the new middle school. Nobody will feel it. It's gonna be very minor, we hope. Also, the Pennachuck Middle School, the Steel is up on the IT library, new addition. That's moving along very, very well, barring any rain. And the signalization is going in, and sometime in July, 1st August, all the new traffic lights and everything will be in, all the paving will be done, and it'll be easier to get through that intersection. Alderman Clee used to stand out there with a flag trying to wave. It's like the Indy 500, so the school project's going very well. All right, Alderman O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
The motion is to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned at 8:20.